And now, ladies and gentlemen, meet the press, America's press conference of the year. Ready for this unrehearsed, spontaneous press conference are four of America's top reporters. Their questions, please remember, do not necessarily reveal their point of view. It is their way of getting a story for you. Here is this evening's moderator of Meet the Press, Mr. Lawrence Spivak.
Good evening, and welcome to another session of Meet the Press. Our guest tonight is Senator-elect John F. Kennedy, whose sensational victory in Massachusetts, in the face of General Eisenhower's landslide, has brought him to national attention as the most important Democratic figure in New England. Gathered around our press table to interview Senator-elect Kennedy are Murray Davis of the World Telegram and Sun, Sylvia Porter of the New York Post, Ogden Reed, Jr. of the New York Herald Tribune, and Robert Riggs of the Louisville Courier-Journal. And now, Senator, if you're ready, Mr. Riggs has the first question.
Senator Kennedy, if I may call you Senator, the man you defeated in Massachusetts, Mr. Lodge, was the outstanding Republican symbol of international foreign policy, a symbol of the bipartisan foreign policy. Do you believe your defeat of Senator Lodge is a repudiation of that policy?
No, I don't, as there was not a tremendous difference between us on foreign affairs. That was not an issue in this campaign to any substantial degree.
In that case, how do you explain the extent of support you got from the Taft wing of the Republican Party in Massachusetts? You did get quite a bit of help from the Taft people, did you not?
No, I wouldn't. I would say we got from one former Taft supporter, Basil Brewer, the editor of the New Bedford Standard Times. He was the only Republican who supported me. No other member of the Taft group supported me, and Mr. Taft himself wrote a letter calling for the election of all Republicans, which included Senator Lodge. So that I would say that the support of the Taft wing was minor, except in the case of Mr. Brewer, who supported Senator Walsh in 1946.
But you also had the support, Senator Kennedy, of the Chicago Tribune, which was a very strong isolationist pro-Taft paper.
I wouldn't say the Chicago Tribune had great influence in Massachusetts.
No, it doesn't circulate there, of course, but they were for you and Senator Byrd. In Virginia, they don't...
Well, I appreciated their support if they felt they could, in truth, support me. Not because they felt that they agreed with my politics, Mr. Riggs, but because they disagreed with the part Mr. Lodge played in defeating Senator Taft.
But our original point was that you don't think the foreign policy has been repudiated.
No, I don't, as I've supported it in the main.
Mr. Davis.
Senator, what do you think was the most important factor in your successful campaign over Senator Lodge?
Well, Mr. Davis, I think all these campaigns, successes and failures, are due to a number of circumstances.
Well,
and I think that's true in Massachusetts. I would say in Massachusetts, the most important one was the state itself and what's happened to it in the last 6 years and its competition with the South and the loss of industry. And I think that that was my campaign slogan. The slogan was that I'll do more for Massachusetts. And I think that the feeling of the people of the state was that our interests had been neglected.
Well, there must have been something else, Senator, because your Democratic governor lost by 18,000. The Republican candidate for president won by 206,000, and you won by 68,000. There's quite a wide discrepancy there in pluralities.
That's right, but I
so
think that...
What did you have?
I would say that that was the major factor, if there was a major factor, but there were others. I worked a lot longer and a lot harder in Massachusetts than did Senator Lodge. He was working for General Eisenhower, and I think he felt that that would take care of his Massachusetts position, particularly when General Eisenhower was successful. In addition, I think that Massachusetts has a Democratic tendency, basically. It's been Democratic through the last 5 presidential elections, though it didn't go this time. In addition, I think there was a desire for a change which affected all incumbents, Republicans and Democrats.
All right, Mr. Davis.
Do you think that President Truman aided your campaign in Massachusetts?
Yes, I think he helped.
Ms. Porter.
Senator, as a new senator and one of the most important in the Senate of the United States, you now represent a minority party. What do you think should be the role of that minority party during the next 4 years? A fighting minority, what they call the loyal opposition, or cooperative minority? How do you see you and your party in the next 4 years?
Well, I think that we should not do what, in some cases, the Republicans did was in the last few years, to oppose actions which are basically good merely to set up an argument against us for the future. I think that if the Republicans had not had General Eisenhower, who did not have a legislative record behind him, and had nominated a Republican who had been a member of the House and the Senate that the Republicans wouldn't have been successful because they opposed actions which proved to be good. Therefore, I think that we should support things that are good, obviously, for the country. It's both good for the country and good politically, and oppose those things which are not good. And I think we'll have plenty of chance to demonstrate our opposition as time goes on. I don't think there's going to be any doubt about that.
Then you are perfectly willing to start out in January as letting the Republicans go right ahead, and you will stand by as a quiet, loyal minority.
No, we want, as long as they do what we think is right, of course.
Suppose the Republicans do nothing but good, aren't you going to be in an awful spot?
Well, we'll take that chance.
Well, would you say, for instance, at the beginning, there's Senator Milliken has been called in on the budget. Do you think that this Senator Milliken's background in foreign economic policy and the budget would permit you to sit by and say this is fine?
Not a bit. I believe that if the Republican who are going to be in positions of influence in the House and Senate carry on as they have in the last 6 years since I've been there, that the Democrats are going to be reelected in 1956 by a large majority. Now, maybe General Eisenhower will follow a different course, and maybe they will, now that they have the responsibility, will follow a different course. But I'm confident that if they follow the course they followed in the past, that they're not going to last very long.
Mr. Reed.
Senator Kennedy, to get back to foreign policy a minute, if we may, clearly one of the great issues facing the new administration and the new Congress is the question of war and peace and the backing up of our allies overseas, not only in Europe, but in the Pacific. In the past, you have been critical of the Truman administration's handling of the Middle East. Particularly, you criticized the handling of 700,000 Arab refugees. What do you think that the new administration should adopt as a policy for the Middle East within the overall context of helping the free nations of the world?
Well, I think that my criticism of our policy went much farther than the Middle East, and included Southeast Asia, and it also the 700,000 Arab refugees were a problem that I think concerns us all. Now, what is your question was, what my suggestion was about the refugees?
Well, my general question was, what specifically would you do in terms of setting up a new policy for the Middle East within the overall context of aid to our allies around the world?
Well, I was particularly critical when I came back about Iran. I thought that the British position in Iran, and I was there a year ago, October, was hopeless, and that the United States should have thrown its weight completely with the Iranians. And I think the time was going to prove that that was the right position. I also have supported more extensive assistance in so-called Point Four, but most of my criticisms were directed to Iran, our policy in French Indochina, and to a lesser degree in India. But and the refugees in Israel, the Arab refugees, were a problem that I think we should devote all our energies to resettling them, either in Syria or in countries where we can.
Have you agreed with the administration policies on Israel?
Yes, I did.
Now, if you get one other area, French Indochina, what specifically do you think we ought to do? Undoubtedly, you have talked recently with French leaders. Increasingly, they are concerned over their ability to meet the job there without increasing aid from us and other countries. What do you think specifically we should do in Indochina?
Well, once again, Mr. Reed, without going back into the past, when I came back from there a year ago, I felt that the United States had identified itself too much with the French, that when we went in there at the time of the beginning of the Korean War, that we should have guaranteed, before our assistance became as extensive as it has, that the French would leave the country once the communist movement had been crushed in order to win the support of the native people. Now, that's still a factor. I think we're going to have to assist the French, but I think that, as in Korea, that we should attempt to win the support of the native groups who've been almost forgotten in this clash between the French and the communists. And by our merely supporting the French, as most of the Asiatics regard the French as imperialists, we take the chance in financing a war which in the end we're going to eventually lose, unless we can win the support of the natives of that area. And I don't think our policies have been directed strong enough in the past. Now we've almost reached an impasse. It may be too late.
Now, Mr. Riggs.
Senator Kennedy, when you get to Washington and to the Senate, you will find two Democratic senators who bolted the Democratic presidential nominee, Senator Byrd of Virginia and the new man, Price Daniel of Texas. Do you think they should be part of the Democratic caucus of the Senate?
I doubt, Mr. Riggs, as a new senator, that I'd be in any position to prevent Mr. Byrd from taking an active part in the caucus. I think that it puts some question on his support of the Democratic Party, but I think, as a matter of fact, that they will both be counted in as Democrats.
How far do you have to?
I hope next time, however, at the next convention, that our that we make sure that those who take a part in the convention agree even more strongly than Mr. Evidently, we thought that Mr. Shivers was going to take a part in it, but was going to support Governor Stevenson. But the way the loyalty oath, so-called, was finally worded, it permitted him to not to. Now, I think next time we should be firmer.
You think if they step out of the party, they ought to be read out before the convention rather than...
Well, I don't think they should be permitted to participate in it if they're not going to follow through with the decision of the convention.
I believe you were on the side at Chicago of getting him out of the convention, were you not?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't a delegate, and my feeling was that we shouldn't break up the party on that issue.
Now, would the Democratic Party have been any worse off if you'd thrown him out at Chicago than they are now?
No, it wouldn't have.
Miss Porter.
To get to a different question.
Loyalty oaths are never very satisfactory, and I'm sure if we had thrown them out that the situation wouldn't be any better. But I hope next time it'll be possible for us to try to bring about more uniformity in the support the candidate gets.
Senator Kennedy, during the campaign, both candidates stressed the danger of inflation and the ways in which they would control it. Yet at the same time, among the people who I have been speaking to in government and business, deflation is mentioned as the great threat of the next 4 years, which would go far beyond many of the superficial issues discussed during the campaign. What do you, as a leading member of the Democratic Party, believe will be the major economic threat during these coming years, inflation or deflation?
Well, I would agree, Ms. Porter, that deflation is going to be the more serious problem, particularly if efforts are made, which General Eisenhower and Senator Taft and others have talked about, of reducing our federal expenditures. Once we begin to balance the budget or to begin to reduce our national debt, then deflation obviously going to be the major issue to build up sufficient consumer purchasing power to absorb our increased productivity. And I think that's going to be the major problem we're going to face in this decade.
If that is so, what would you suggest the United States administration and Congress should do beginning in January to meet this threat of deflation?
Well, I think that we should I think we should attempt to bring our budget reasonably in balance. I don't think you can maintain a $10 billion deficit in order to keep your economy going. We're going far beyond what we have to. But I think that we ought to go slowly in bringing our governmental expenditures into line and make sure that we do not have happen what began to happen in 1948 and 49. I think there's enough postponed purchasing power that we can still count on good times for the next 2 or 3 years. But I think that if it begins to slacken off, then the government's going to have to begin expending, particularly if the recession goes in any large extent. But I don't think it's a problem for the next 2 years. I think it's after that.
Well, do you see
because I think there's still enough deferred demand.
Say a recession? Do you foresee a recession?
No,
Senator?
I don't right away, because I think we're going to be spending enough money for national defense and foreign assistance, and our budget won't be balanced right away, and also there's enough deferred purchasing power. But I think when that runs out, which might be around the end of 54 and 55, then I think recession is going to be a major problem.
You can't see it before then?
Well, I don't, unless they cut all government spending much farther than I think they're going to be able to for 53 and 54.
Then you think that many of the promises made about cutting spending are just promises that won't be able to be done anyway?
Well, they won't be able to next year because we still have great demands on our national defense and on foreign assistance. They may be able to balance the budget, but I would doubt it. Now, when they do in 54, I still think, as I say, there's going to be enough purchasing power built up to prevent a recession. I would say the end of 54, beginning of 55, this will be the major problem.
Well, you
may
think,
come before that.
You think, then, as the Republicans charge, that our prosperity was essentially a raw prosperity, and deflation would come as soon as you stop spending?
I think that it's a problem that when we do stop spending and when this deferred, which is now being postponed spending, is exhausted, then it is a problem, definitely.
And you would rather offset this through maintaining expenditures than cutting taxes?
Well, I think it's obviously both, Ms. Porter. Anything to put enough consumer purchasing power in the market, and obviously that's both ways.
Mr. Davis.
Do I understand, Senator, that you're against a balanced budget?
No, I'm not against a balanced budget, but I think that we're going to have to be concerned when our budget is balanced and when this the spending, which is now being deferred because of shortages, etc., is exhausted. Then a balanced budget, then if you begin to get a recession, then your budget will have to become unbalanced again.
Well,
and we began to get it
that.
in New England the other day, 2 years ago, before the Korean War began.
Now, clear me up on this. Wouldn't you like to see a balanced budget within the next year? You're a New Englander, and they're supposed to be a thrifty people.
Yes, I want to see the budget balanced, but I also definitely. But I think that if you begin to get a recession and unemployment, And we would get it first in New England, I think. And we began to get it first in 48 and 49. Then you would have to keep these people working, and you'd have to, if that was one way to do it, then I'd be in favor of unbalancing the budget. Not enough to cause us severe economic dislocations, but enough to keep a reasonable level of prosperity in the country.
Well, I'm going to assume then that you don't believe in a balanced budget necessarily.
No, well, don't assume that, Mr. Davis. I believe in it, but I also, I'm just talking about what the problem will be if we get a recession in this country and unemployment.
But you don't
what
need
the steps are that can be taken to meet it. And I think that's one of the things that will have to be taken to meet it if we do get the recession. I hope we don't. And I'm not saying that balancing the budget is going to bring it about. But if it does come, as Ms. Porter has suggested that there's a chance it might come about, that's one of the steps that should be taken to meet it.
Well, would you go on with a war economy, whether you needed it or not?
No, I've said before that I'm in favor of balancing the budget, but if we do get a recession, one of the steps to meet the recession, obviously, is going to have to be government expenditures it was in the 30s.
Mr. Reed.
Senator Kennedy, one of the great issues, I think, in the campaign, and certainly an area where the new administration has got to do some pioneering, is the question of what should be the relationship between the federal government and states and local community governments. Now, in this area, in the past, you have supported, I believe, federal aid to parochial schools.
No, I didn't, because I supported auxiliary services to parochial school children. The aid to parochial schools is unconstitutional, and I'm not for that.
But were you in favor of federal aid to be used for bus transportation?
Yes, that's right.
Do you think that violates the concept of the separation of powers between...
No, in the Everson bus case, it was held constitutional. There's nothing unconstitutional about giving assistance to school children. We already give school children who go to parochial schools school luncheons. And I would consider bus rides under the same, at least the Supreme Court has held it. If you gave the assistance directly to the school instead of to the child, then it would be unconstitutional.
Senator, there are many who think that there's going to be a bitter struggle between the Truman Democrats and the anti-Truman Democrats. Do you think, in the party, do you think that's so?
No, I think that fight is past.
No, who won it?
Well, we didn't win. I don't know who won it.
Well, when you say we didn't win, do you mean the Truman Democrats
I don't think
or
that
the
Truman Democrat. I don't think President Truman, as he himself has said, is going to be the issue in the future.
No, but he certainly has
You
indicated that he's going to keep some interest in the party.
No, but I don't think he as a person is going to be the issue. The issue may be between the conservative and the so-called liberal Democrats, and I think that is a battle that will go on in the next few years and will depend in part on what happens to the country's economy and partly what the Republicans do. But that's a battle which is still in midair, and I would say that the conservative Democrats were in the major positions today.
Now, this is pretty early to begin talking about 1956, but do you have a candidate for the presidency for 1956?
I think that it is early, and no one knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years.
Well,
I do believe that
Governor
Stevenson. I believe that today I would certainly say that Governor Stevenson would be my candidate for the presidency. I think he ran a fine campaign. He's easily the leader of the party, and I have no doubt that he's going to stay that way. It's still early to say what's going to happen in '56, but he's in I would say, the dominant position.
Ms. Porter.
You mentioned before, Senator, that one of the reasons you were elected was because you promised to help Massachusetts with its special problems. Do you believe that the federal government should take action to help, especially, do you say you would call Massachusetts a depressed area? You think it actually ought to walk in and make special moves when a certain amount of unemployment comes?
Well, I think that federal policies could be used to assist the New England area. Now, what I'm thinking of particularly, we are in pretty good shape except for textiles and shoes, and that's low-wage Southern competition. Therefore, I believe in repealing the Taft-Hartley bill and developing a labor policy which will encourage the unionization of the South. We are lowering our wages to compete with the South instead of raising the South so that we can both survive. And I would also raise the minimum wage, and I would strengthen the Walsh-Healy Act, and develop our natural resources as the South has developed theirs. I have no argument with the South. They've developed their assets, and I don't think we have, and we haven't used federal policies to develop our assets.
So you would
in addition, when you have a distressed area, I would then give them governmental assistance if the unemployment is severe, which it has been in Lawrence, particularly over the last years. I would have given them some advantage in governmental contracts when the unemployment reached a certain percentage.
Do you think, in view of the fact that the Republicans will have a majority in both houses and that the Republican President, that you have a chance of getting this sort of policy?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether they would go for that or not. I think they ought to. 10 out of the 12 New England senators are Republicans. They must be concerned for their area. And we don't want to see New England lower itself in order to compete with the South. We want to see the South come up so that we can both do better.
So going back to the first question,
Before you get to that, how do you think that the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act is going to help you New Englanders?
Well, I think that one of the difficulties has been with our problem has been competing with the South, which is not unionized in a great extent, and their wage scales are substantially lower than ours. I hope that a new labor law, which will stimulate unionization of the South, and a higher minimum wage will raise the wage structure of the South and will better both of our positions.
Well, you think that the Taft-Hartley Act has prevented unionization
has
in the South?
helped limit it, and the state laws that were passed as a result of the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947 and 48 in many southern states.
Go ahead, Ms.
But I wanted to finish, going back to your first statement about considering being the party to stand by and watch what the Republicans do, you probably will get working January 21st on these things. Is this correct?
Well, I'm certainly hoping to. That's why I was elected, and I certainly have an obligation to do something about it.
Mr. Riggs.
Senator, a good many people think that the election means that there's no longer any chance of repealing a Taft-Hartley Act. I assume you don't agree with that.
I would think that it's been made far more difficult. I would doubt if the Taft-Hartley bill would be repealed in the next 2 years. I think it will be amended, but I would not think, due to the complexion of the Congress, that it will be repealed.
Now, you spoke a minute ago of your lack of influence as a freshman senator. But do you have
keeping Senator Byrd out of the caucus, yeah.
But do you have any thoughts at all about who might be the Democratic minority leader of the Senate?
No, I don't, Mr. Riggs. Maybe Senator Clements from your own state of, I believe, Kentucky.
Senator Kennedy
Mr. Reed
has been mentioned, and I think he'd be a fine man, but I don't have any real information.
Senator Kennedy, to get back to this other question for 1 minute, are you in favor of federal aid to education, and if so, could you specify in what areas?
I'm in favor of federal aid to education to the needy states, providing the percentage that they devote to education is higher, reasonably higher than the national average, and it's needy. And in addition, providing that they don't they treat all students alike. In addition, I would insist that an amendment be put into it that would give aid to all children, regardless of and if the state laws would prevent so-called bus rides, then I would be in favor of the federal government setting aside a certain amount which they could disperse.
Are you afraid that this might not lead to federal control over education and education policies?
Well, we'd have to make sure in the bill that would not be done. Now, we do have some patterns to which we could follow. The Burton Hill Act, which assists the communities in building hospitals. It prevents control of medicine. We could perhaps provide for federal assistance for building schools or helping communities build schools, and then the federal assistance would be so indirect that I'm sure that the community could maintain and the states could maintain control over their own education system. I think that's vital, and I think we have some formulas that we can follow.
Senator, there's been a good deal of talk about Senator Lodge for the post of Secretary of Defense or possibly Secretary of State. Now, would you vote to confirm him for either of those posts?
Yes, I would. I think that the president has the right to pick whom he wants, and I would vote. And if he chose Senator Lodge, I would vote to confirm him.
Mr. Davis.
Senator, the recent lack of success of the combination of Labor and Democratic Party, do you think that will bring about a Labor Party in this country?
No, I don't, and I would be against it. I don't see how it would be successful. Obviously, Labor hasn't got enough votes to win by itself. It must depend on other groups. And those groups, unless there was some severe economic dislocations and a whole change in our whole system in this country, I can't see that taking place. I think it would be bad for Labor and for the country.
Well, are you courting Labor, then, on this deficit spending program that you insist on as being the successful way?
Mr. Davis, you keep saying that. Now, I just want to get my position clear.
I want to get it straight.
I am not in favor of deficit spending. All I'm saying is, Ms. Porter asked me what I would do if we had a recession. And one device which she suggested was reducing taxes, which of course I would agree with. Another device, if you reduce taxes and you had people out of work, you would have to have governmental spending, which might mean an unbalanced budget. Now, I'm in favor of balancing the budget if you can keep your prosperity going as a step which I would take if you had unemployment, which was severe. I would favor governmental spending as we did in the 30s.
Senator, when General Eisenhower announced that he was going to Korea, the Democrats said it was just a device to get votes. Now, do you think he can accomplish anything by going to Korea? Do you think he ought to go?
Yes, I think he ought to go, and I think he can accomplish something. I agree with Governor Stevenson that the right address to end the Korean War is not Korea, but Moscow. But there are a number of things which he can do, and I'm sure with his military experience, combined with his civil responsibility now, as president-elect, he can do something about perhaps training or speeding up the training of South Koreans. Perhaps we can use Japanese, which hasn't been done yet, and perhaps we can use nationalist Chinese. So I'm in favor of him going to know the terrain and the problems of our troops. Anyone who's in a responsible position ought to go to Korea.
Thank you, Senator. I'm sorry to interrupt, but our time is up. This concludes the latest edition of Meet the Press.